Thank you so much for joining, everyone. My name is Tara Jenkins, and I'm the lead of the Conscious Capitalism chapter in Portland. And I think you know, but just to make sure that you know why you're here, this is a deep dive of one of the tenets of conscious capitalism, conscious leadership. So we're going to spend some time talking about conscious leadership today. And as Darren was just referencing, we have some other sessions that have talked about the other tenets, as well as just an overview of the benefit economy and sort of where this work gets placed in the benefit economy that are in recordings. And we have these sessions generally happening continuously. So if this intrigues and piques your curiosity further and you want to learn more, there's definitely other opportunities to do that. Does anyone have any questions before we get started? Okay. And we may have more people come in. It's, as you can imagine, in the world today, we have, you have a bunch of people sign up and you never have any idea who's actually going to show up. So we had a lot of people sign up today, and maybe they'll come and maybe they won't, but we're very happy with with all of you being here. And I'd like you to first, to start off, to allow us to all get sort of settled into this space, because you've probably been running around all day long, just like me, to different meetings or different Zooms. And it's 3 o'clock, and it's kind of the point of the day where you might feel like you need some sugar or a snack, or maybe something else to get through.
Or a nap.
What was that, Armando?
Or a nap.
Yes, a nap, absolutely. More oxygen to your brain. Is to just settle in, take a deep breath, couple of breaths, whatever you do to get yourself relaxed. And I want you to actually visualize the best example of leadership that you've seen in your life. Could be from a work setting, could be from sports or coaching, could be from someone, keep in mind, not necessarily designated in a leadership role, but that you saw a demonstration of leadership like you hadn't seen before, that's in your memory. Also could be something that you did yourself that you were particularly proud of as a leader. Just take a few moments to think about that, sort of put yourself back into that memory of what that was like to view that and what you saw in viewing that. And if you forgot to breathe, breathing will really help you remember. So don't forget that part. And if anyone got right back there right away, if something came right to mind, I'm just going to ask for a couple of people or a few of you, if you'd like to just share with the group as a way to start our conversation around conscious leadership. Go ahead, Amanda.
The first thing that came to mind is those bosses or leaders that I've had in my life that are servant. I think that's the word. That's a kind of leadership that also we've been learning more about here since I've been working in improving agile leadership, and it's all about servant, because that whole leadership, that thing that they have to be like these tyrants or barking orders or you're on service for me, those are the ones that are not good leaders. So the ones that came to mind are those the first ones to ask, do you need something? How can I help you? And many people don't have that mindset that leaders should be like serving their teams, right? I don't know if I explained myself, sorry, Spanish.
No, absolutely. You explained yourself. Yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you.
I was kind of on the same thought. The first person came to my mind was a boss that I had, and I was starting in a new position that I had no background in. And he was really supportive of my learning process and being the best that I could be. And I remember one time going to a conference where we were going to speak, and I had to present this thing that I honestly didn't even know what I was talking about. I was like, I could present it with confidence, but if anybody asked me a question, I would have been like, I don't really know. And I remember one thing he said to me before we went in, he said, do your best. He goes, and I won't let you fail. And it was such a bit of confidence that he gave me, like, you're going to do great, but, I'm going to make sure that this is successful for you. And I remembered that and have used that over the years for people that I have led.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that great example, Christine. Really appreciate it. Would anyone else like to share an example? Yeah, go ahead, Sandra.
The thought that just came to mind is, and it aligns very well with the conscious part of that leadership phrase, and just giving of their time. I think, and that aligns with what Armando was saying with the servant, being there to serve somebody else, but giving of their time and their attention. They don't have, they're not checking their phone. They're not, all those kinds of distractions. They're just there to hear and to be there with you and work through what you need. That has always been most meaningful to me.
Thank you. Wonderful. And if anyone else would really like to share, I certainly don't want to stop that. So just to check in, would anyone else like to share? Okay, great. So I'd also like you to reflect on, and we're not going to share these stories because it would probably take the rest of the time, to be honest, but reflect on examples of poor leadership that you've seen, that you knew was not conscious, and you probably wouldn't define as leadership either. Sometimes coming from people with leadership positions, but what we can just acknowledge, I'm sure in this group would be easy to acknowledge, is that a title does not equate to leadership in any way. And so the other thing that we can really learn around conscious leadership is those examples of where it's done really well, where someone says, I won't let you fail, or I recognize that I'm here to serve you, or I want to get giving of my time. Those wonderful examples that if we put ourselves back into the place of thinking about how those individuals sort of embodied leadership, you can get right back there and have this really good feeling about what that was like to be working with that person or being supported by that person. You can also learn an awful lot, but when you've seen leadership that you knew was not leadership that you would ever want to emulate, how do I make sure I don't do that? And how do I see that impacting me and my team members and my colleagues in a way that motivates me to continue to work on my leadership? And one of the things that we talk about in Conscious Capitalism is that you are always on a journey. You're always working on this. So you're never done. You're always evolving. And so each of us is coming into this work from a different place, which is absolutely expected. We're each individuals with different experiences, different backgrounds, different strengths, different occupations. And so wherever you are right now is the right place for you. And then wherever you want to continue to evolve and go next is really your own developmental journey. And that would be the case for a whole organization as well. So we're never going to have a perfect person, a perfect leader, a perfect organization, because we are all humans and by naturally imperfect. But we can continue to get better, continue to learn, continue to grow, continue to develop. And that's a fundamental element of being a conscious leader, is that growth and development piece, and the acknowledgement that we're always working to get better and more aligned and more authentic and more true to who we really are in order to share that with the world. How does that feel as a starting point? Okay, so I'm going to share a slide deck that comes from Conscious Capitalism that takes us through the elements of conscious leadership. And that it will give us some time to reflect on in some of the ways that conscious leadership is articulated within conscious capitalism as a tenet. You'll see some probably areas where you're like, yeah, that totally makes sense. And I feel like I do that really well. And then you may see some areas where you're like, that might be something I need to explore. And I just want you to take note of where you think there's something. Definitely take note of your strengths and things that you feel you got well in hand. But also notice what you're curious about, because that might be the clue about what you might want to focus on in the next phase of your conscious leadership journey. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. And we'll go through this together. And for some reason, hold on, I just can't see. All of the Zoom stuff is blocking my slides. Okay, there we go. Here we go. Okay, so you'll see this noted as the third tenet. There's really no magic about the numbers, just so you know. So this could have been the second tenet. It's just the order that they describe them in. I'll show a slide here. There are 4 tenets. Some of you have been in the other sessions where we talked about these. So higher purpose. What is the higher purpose of the worthy problem you're going to solve in your business is the first tenet. The second is stakeholder orientation. And so it's how do you add value to all of the stakeholders that touch your business? And the third is conscious leadership that we're talking about. And the fourth is conscious culture. And what is really important and something that you mentioned, Sandra, that we should really be underscoring is the consciousness piece of this work. So leadership exists most of the time. Culture exists no matter what. But do you know what you want that culture to be? Do you know what you want that leadership to be? Have you declared what that should look like in support of the business? And in conscious capitalism, we would say in support of that higher purpose. So it's the deliberateness with which we are doing this is a central component to conscious capitalism and to this work. So really stakeholder orientation, conscious leadership, conscious culture are kind of interchangeable in terms of their numbers. It's not like if you're practicing conscious capitalism, you'd start first with higher purpose and then go to stakeholder orientation, then conscious leadership, and then conscious culture. They're all integrated together in a web. And an organization may be much stronger in one tenet than the other. I would purport to you, and I think my conscious business colleagues in lots of different spaces that would agree that there is no organization at this point that is practicing all of these tenets at their highest level, at their most evolved level. It doesn't exist yet. We're all working towards that. It's all much of it is aspirational. You have many organizations that do 1 or 2 or even 3 of these extremely well. But the integration of all of them and having them all operating, simultaneously and in a highly evolved manner has yet to be seen. So can't wait to see that. So we're going to go into conscious culture, and this is just a little bit of personal reflection. We won't spend too much time here. We've already talked about the qualities that you admire in leaders, which is the third question here. But it's just a good thing for self-reflection for us to continuously think about, how would we describe ourselves as a leader? And I talk with a lot of people that sometimes would say, I wouldn't describe myself as a leader at all. And that's another opportunity to reflect. Well, why not? You might not describe yourself as a leader in your business context potentially, but I would wonder, are you a leader in any other sphere of your life? Most of the time people are. And not necessarily, as Armando was saying, in the traditional definition of leadership, the highly masculine, and I'm not saying that necessarily as a genderized word, but the highly masculine articulation of leadership, which is the dictator, the person that knows all the answers, the person that's forging forward, outcomes-oriented person, as opposed to some of the characteristics that you all described, which would be just seen as the more feminine side of leadership. Again, not genderized, because we have many men who practice a different level of leadership than a sort of dictatorial side of listening and serving and being relationship oriented rather than outcomes oriented. So it's really a reflection on how would you describe yourself? How do you think your team would describe you? And do you want that to be any different? And it's a way to think about what you want to be doing in your own development. So we won't take time, some of that takes time to reflect on, but would encourage you, if those questions resonate with you, and then how would you describe yourself? How would your team describe yourself? And then how would you like to be described? Or how would you like to know yourself as a leader differently than you do today? Those are great places and questions to start with to determine where you want to focus next in your conscious leadership journey. Any comments or questions? Okay, you guys all know the drill on Zoom. So hard to read groups on Zoom. So and sometimes, particularly when I'm showing my slides, I can't see everybody. So make sure if you have a question or a thought, really this should be as participative as possible. So please jump in. Although I recognize, again, it's 3 o'clock and you might want to just be here to absorb stuff. So I'm not going to put you on the spot either. So just jump in if you need to. Okay, so this is it's a little bit of a wordy slide, but let's just distinguish between leadership and management. So we're talking about conscious leadership really being about, when you think about it, change, transformation, the strategy, you're building, you're architecting. If you think about declaring a higher purpose of an organization, that's a leader doing that and having the vision to understand what that would look like, and manipulating or changing systems in order to make that happen. So it's a very high bar for leadership. And again, that doesn't mean, really think about this much more broadly than organizations. That could be in a family, that could be in a group, in a sports team, in a community organization. Like any of leadership applies in all of those spaces. And then management is about outcomes, getting things done, efficiency, implementation. So sometimes those get confused. And so we're talking about visionary, strategic change and transformation of organizations and systems, family systems, community systems, whatever it might be. That probably resonates with this group, I would imagine, because it's pretty common concepts. Okay, great. And it's just to be aware that in many organizations, those two things are not distinguished. And so it might be important to distinguish them in your own mind as you're going through this work. There's examples on this slide, certainly, obviously not all inclusive, of who conscious capitalism would consider conscious leaders, who have been doing their work and are at different phases of this work for many years. So it's just more of it might be out of curiosity to look at who has been doing this work for a while. Bob Chapman, who's the 4th on that list, wrote a book called Everyone Matters. And that's a great book. If you haven't read it, it's a really great example of conscious leadership, and like he's really documented all of that. Jay Cohen Gilbert, founder of B Lab, along with his colleagues there, Bart and Andrew. B Lab is the founder of the Certified B Corp process. And so they certainly are considered. Dr. Freeman, who came up with the concept of stakeholder capitalism, essentially, is the sort of the founder of that. And then you'll see, like, in India Nori, which is PepsiCo, who maybe you are familiar with. So Paul Pullman, who did some amazing stuff at Unilever when he was there. The list is not gender diverse or diverse by lots of other definitions. So I'll just declare that now. And that's something that conscious capitalism needs to work on. Yeah, but great, nonetheless, great examples of people who really had a vision and fought against, most of the time, the traditional way of thinking about success in business, and did that through their conscious leadership. So let's talk a little bit more about what conscious leaders look like. And the first thing I want to comment about here is, and it links to the servant leadership as well. Acronyms are super helpful because they help us remember, of course, how to sort of think about something, or some of the different words that might describe it, as we see here. So the acronym that Conscious Capitalism uses for a conscious leader is selfless. And what I want to point out is, certainly use the acronym, but I actually really don't want you to think about a conscious leader as selfless. And I don't want you to also think about a servant leader as someone who is only conscious or thinking about serving others. And I just ask, why do you think I'd be saying that? Like, what comes to mind for anyone in this group when I'm saying, please don't think of a conscious leader as selfless or a servant leader as only serving others?
Well, I think as a leader, you do have to pay attention to taking care of yourself and your own needs so that you then can be available emotionally, and, and your intelligence and all of that has to be strong in order to be able to lead other people.
Yeah, Christine, spot on. Armando, it looked like you might have been wanting to add something.
We have a saying in Mexico, it's like charity starts at home. So it's kind of what she was saying, that you can be totally selfless because you have to make sure that you are okay, that you have also the tools to do your own work and stuff. And then you can take care of the rest of the team and be servant. But you have to start first at home.
Yes.
I think it's clear. I think it's important to distinguish between selfless and selfish.
Yeah.
Like they're not the same. Like you can be but anyway, you're not being selfish if you're being selfless. Yes,
that's really, really a good point. Yeah, you're all getting it. It is often confused or misinterpreted. And it is, we would say in the same way that charity starts at home, like if you think about that, put your oxygen mask on first in the plane, right? So you can think of probably many times for yourself where you might not have been at your best and you knew it because you were trying to give too much to others and not take care enough of your own needs. You cannot be in a leadership space at your most optimal leadership space if you're not taking care of your own needs at its most fundamental level, and not necessarily at its most fundamental level. You think about Maslow's hierarchy of you need to make sure you have shelter and you have food and you have clothing and all those pieces. But do you have your own support networks? Do you have your own people to talk to as a leader? Also, do you have your own practices? Your own daily rituals, practices, so things you do weekly, things you do for yourself that bring you back to yourself and who you are and show yourself love. And so if you don't have those, or if I'm saying that and you're saying, I'm not sure I really have that, that would be a place to start. It'd be like, we do things for ourselves as practices or rituals to take care of ourselves. And it might be you take a walk every day at a certain time, or you get together with a loved one for a chat on the phone, or something that gives you energy and a sense of fulfillment outside of what you might be driving for outcomes at work or certain things that are happening in your life. It's things that you do for yourself just because it's something important to do for yourself. And that's it. So the qualities of a conscious leader, we're going to start talking about those with the understanding that you are taking care of yourself already in whatever way you need to do that. And you've incorporated daily or regular practices or rituals to take care of yourself so that you can show up and be able to do this work as a conscious leader in fully and in complete authenticity. So the first quality is strength, and there's some slides that give some explanation of this. So I'll just flip through those as we go. But and you can all read this. But I think that the strength piece, and probably this might resonate as you think about different leaders, is they don't use the word vulnerability here, but I would say a piece of this is vulnerability. So confidence, certainly, without arrogance, and courage, those are things that we would say are strengths, but being aware of weaknesses and also being able to share what your weaknesses are. And gathering strength from within, as we've talked about a little bit, and then from external sources as well. But, where is that strength from within? So really conscious leaders would be open to sharing where they perceive their weaknesses, what they're actually working on, give more insight into themselves with their teams and with their colleagues, and and also acknowledging those weaknesses to surround themselves with people that would help them to collectively address those weaknesses. So you could think of strong leaders in your past, I'm sure, that might have said, I really stink at this. I need to hire someone that's way better than me at doing this. That level of self-awareness and self-reflection then turning into action on doing something that acknowledges that they can't be everything and can't do everything well. Just not human to do that. Although many leaders really, really try because they think that's what the definition is. Okay, but please, if you want to make a comment or something strikes you or you have a question, please jump in. But I'll keep going through them until I hear from somebody. Sandra, did you have, oh, Christine, maybe you have something.
Nope, I did not on this. But I do, since I just want to ask one question. I know we're recording this, but are the slides to this going to be somewhere, or are they on the website?
Well, the slides will be in the recording, but we can definitely put them on the website as well.
Terrific, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so the next is energy and enthusiasm. I'm sure this one is abundantly obvious. From the standpoint of what a leader that would come across as being demoralized or low energy is going to have a really hard time engaging people. But this piece also really does highlight the setting aside for self-care, learning and growing. So that's having the energy to actually demonstrate energy enthusiasm. We can all probably think of examples of leaders that were faking energy and enthusiasm. And we all know as humans when something is not authentic. So this is like a real thing. Like, yeah, you have to be doing the self-care and the learning and growing in order to authentically show up with energy and enthusiasm in your work. And I can think back to times where I was faking it. I had a designated leadership role, and over a period of time, I was faking energy and enthusiasm and trying to protect my team from knowing the things that might have been going on. And it's not a sustainable model for anybody involved. And so it's really that piece around the self-care and figuring out how you can keep your energy at that high level as a part of your consciousness. And then a real differentiation in conscious capitalism, but certainly with conscious leaders, is this long-term orientation. So many organizations systemically have a short-term orientation, particularly if you're in a public company, because the orientation tends to be quarter by quarter. But most businesses operate on a short-term orientation. It might not be quarterly, but it might be a lot shorter. And so what we think about as a conscious leader is that you're thinking about the impact that you have and your work has for generations to come. And you're thinking about the imprint that you're making on people in the organization when you're no longer there. So this is a real differentiation. So this is those who create organizations that outlast their leadership, or those who are in organizations that are looking for direction from leaders, which is what that means around to tell the time. And one of the things you can think about as you're doing this work is, what type of organization are you in right now? How are they defining leadership? And is that a match for what you're looking for in being able to develop your own leadership? So long-term orientation comes into play in all aspects of conscious capitalism. But of course, all of this work is lived through people. And so if we are not taking every opportunity to demonstrate having a longer term orientation, our systems are really designed to be shorter. So we have to be very conscious about that. And then
sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Mark.
I have a question. Can you be more, not specific, but can you explain me a little bit more the last part, leaders to tell the time? Organizations that rely on leaders to tell the time.
Yeah. So
what about tell the time?
Little bit about euphemism, so I can get why it's confusing. So it's more, think of it as a spectrum Where on one side, if you have a conscious organization with conscious leaders running it, they're creating an organization that they're thinking about that organization and it living long past when they're working there. That's the clock builder mentality. The other side is an organization that the leaders are creating an organization that's so dependent on them telling people what to do, going back to what you said earlier, Armando, so dependent on tell me what the time is, leader, and then I'll go and figure out what I need to do next.
I totally get it now.
Builder versus the teller.
Sorry, kind of dumb that I didn't get it.
No,
get
it's
the
not.
reference.
It's actually, it's a little bit convoluted the way that they're describing it. You already get it, I know, because you already described it in your intro. So it's
Thank
just
you,
a little
Tara.
bit different. Yeah, no worries. Okay, so then the next one, you can think of leaders where you have worked with, for, or yourself, where there's times where ultimate flexibility is needed, particularly in the world today, and being able to be flexible. And as they say here, bend without breaking is essential, an essential part of conscious leadership. And one of the things that cultivates flexibility, or at least to be able to see the bigger picture, which usually flexibility is a result of being able to see the bigger picture and seeing like, well, I'm not going to sweat the small stuff along the way. I'm going to be thinking about the bigger picture of what we're trying to accomplish, and that long-term orientation is through, they're talking about employing mindfulness techniques here. It's really recognizing the bigger landscape that you're operating in and recognizing that the situation or context might be changing. And so being flexible with that. So you can think about rigid thinking, rigid leaders, one way to do things, lack of diversity in thinking, all don't lead to healthy organizations and healthy problem solving. And so it's being flexible also to recognize that people come with different experiences and different ideas that you need to listen to and factor in. Okay, and then love and care. So this one is interesting because many of us come from organizations that might say that they care about their employees. Most organizations know they have to say that, but many employees don't experience that in their day-to-day work, that they feel cared for. We just know that from research. Most employees do not feel cared for, and a very small percentage of them actually are engaged at their organizations. The last set of numbers is 30% of employees, only 30% of employees are engaged in their work. That leaves 70% disengagement. And a big piece of that has to do with, does anyone care about me at this place? So it's different to say that you care versus having people feel cared for. And you all probably know this from your experience. So there's places you've worked at where you felt cared for. And there's places you worked at that you felt like just another employee, like another number, another cog in the wheel. The difference here is that, and the difference is really with conscious leadership is, in many of the organizations that care for their employees and might genuinely care for their employees, sometimes the reason why they might be caring as leaders is that they want their organization to succeed, and those employees are essential for the organization to succeed. What we're really talking about here is you love and care for the employees in your organization or anyone that touches your organization as stakeholders, as humans, not as employees, as workers. Does that distinction make sense? Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you, Christine. So you can think of times where you might have been cared for as an employee, but maybe not cared for as a person. Or that taboo word that in business is, if I use it with some of my clients, they're like, what do you love? What are you talking about? That makes me very uncomfortable as a leader. Like, I'm not supposed to love anybody. I'm supposed to love my employees. And that's, we've trained leaders to do that, to not love. But that's an essential part of conscious leadership is a true love and appreciation for who people are, and a true caring about them as people and all of their complexities and nuances. It doesn't mean that you put up with anything in the workplace because you love and care for people, but you're coming at your work through deep love and care for humanity. And conscious capitalism is about elevating business through humanity, or elevating humanity through business. I just said it in the wrong word. Elevating humanity through business.
I had a quick thought or comment to add, and I've kind of been thinking it on each of the prior slides, but particularly here, a lot of the best leaders that I know are leaders inside and outside of work. I know we're talking about this a lot in sort of a business capacity or context, but they're authentic at work and at home and in their personal and social lives, and they don't necessarily change. I mean, you can adapt, right, and change from one to the next, but that authenticity carries through. And I think to make the world a better place, you kind of have to be a leader, or in my business, I think of it as an advisor in every part of your life, not just at work, but it seems to certainly apply here.
Yes, such a good point. That really is full alignment, as you're describing, full alignment and in full authenticity. Thank you for saying that. It would be very, well, as a conscious leader, it would be impossible for them to only show up in one of those spaces as a conscious leader and not in the others. And I think even if you take like conscious leadership out of it, like who we probably would all define as like a true leader, an authentic leader, or even a servant leader, they're always operating in that same mode. Whereas it might be the case that someone is able to exhibit, traditionally strong leadership in one setting, but sort of drop it altogether in another. Yeah. So this is really ingrained in who we are as conscious leaders when we're practicing this. Great. And then we get into emotional intelligence, which is a really complex, interesting area. And you might have read about this. You probably heard about it. There's many different types of intelligences. We often talk about the intellectual intelligence, and that traditionally has been what has differentiated leaders in the past. So leaders with strong in their head intellectual intelligence, they did well in school, they figured out how to work in the systems that have been created for the most part, would be having high grades, high pedigree of institutions that they've been coming out of, and were rewarded for that intellectual intelligence, just as one part of the story. But what we really know now is that intellectual intelligence has a very small amount of coordination with success, true conscious leadership and success in business. Actually, it's really emotional intelligence. And so that has to do with being self-aware and empathetic. And you can see how that's displayed here. So being self-aware is that being in tune with yourself, which is why we're going back to those practicing your practices that you have around being in tune with how you're feeling and how you're taking care of yourself, having awareness and understanding of your own feelings, your own aspirations, and how that might impact how you're interacting with others. It's like the knowledge to know, oh, I have this meeting this afternoon and I'm not in the space to do this well. Like I'm in tune with myself and I'm not going to do this well. So what's going to be my plan? Or I have this meeting this afternoon or this engagement that I have to do. What do I need to do for myself in order to get myself in the right space to be at my best? It's that type of talking to yourself that happens. And then there's the empathy of being, combining that self-awareness with the deep desire to really listen and better understand and walk in someone else's shoes, regardless of whether you've actually been in that experience before, trying to see things from a new perspective. So there's really cool stuff about emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman is a preeminent researcher that lots of businesses use his book. So if this is an area of interest, there's so much more we could be talking about here, but you can think about it, very simplistically as the combination of being self-aware, which is a practice that does have to be continually nurtured, about how am I feeling? How am I showing up? Why is that the case? Do I need that to be any differently? And how am I really listening and paying attention and being in tune with others not being distracted, as was mentioned earlier, being totally focused and being with people in the moment. And then what do I do with that information as I'm gathering that from people and reading them and trying to better understand them? How does that change how I interact with them? And you can think of probably people that you've worked with that have, you would term as lower emotional intelligence. They didn't seem to know how they come across to people, or they didn't seem to know that what they said, how what they said or did would impact others, or hadn't anticipated that. And they didn't seem to make a deeper connection and really put themselves in other shoes in order to work together towards a different type of solution. So emotional intelligence would be practicing sort of the opposites of those things. Okay, and then systems intelligence. So a really key aspect of conscious leadership is to be able to, we talked about sort of that visionary big picture thinking, but system intelligence is really thinking about how does everything connect together, and how does, it's like connecting the dots of like, how does this one thing impact this other thing? And how do I need to influence the system in order to get the changes or transformation that I'm trying to initiate or influence? And this is really about being preventative in some ways. You can see in the slide, like being proactive. So often we're being, in a traditional leadership sense, you might be being reactive. You're reacting to something that has happened in a system, and a system could be in an organization, in a broader system, like education or healthcare, as an example, or it could be a small department. So you can think about system as quite a broad term that could mean many things. But you're trying to, you know enough and you can see enough how the interconnections with that system operate, that you're not always in the reactive mode, you're in the proactive mode. Like, this has happened and I can pinpoint in the system where that is caused, and I'm going to go in and through my team or through my own interventions, fix it there. And this does link to the stakeholder mindset, as you see on this slide, in that systems, different parts of systems have different stakeholders associated with them. So if you think about in an organization, just as an example, the system is made up of a whole bunch of different departments, a whole bunch of people in those departments, a hierarchy, most likely, of how the system operates and how decisions get made. And if you understand who all those stakeholders are, and you understand what value means to them, and you understand what their contribution is in the system, you have much more power to influence the system and power to, build relationships to bring others with you as you're trying to do that. And hopefully be asking them how they want the system to be influenced or changed as well. And then the other piece, the last piece, is spiritual intelligence. So this is where your full authenticity comes from. So it's really important, and usually this is completely left off of most leadership discussions around, we all are walking around with our own set of deep values, our own sense of purpose, or maybe needing to work on what that purpose is, our own set of motivations, our own history around what we think is meaningful, and how we connect to those things. So spiritual intelligence doesn't mean religion per se, although for some people that is how it's demonstrated, but it is our moral compass, how we know what we want to do and what we don't want to do on a day-to-day basis, and what means right and wrong to us. And that may be clear in some instances and not clear in others. And this is a practice of building and curating or cultivating spirituality. And it has a lot to do with the self-care and practices that we were talking about before. So when you know that an organization is aligned with your values, that means you've taken time to think about, what are my values? What's most important to me? And who are the people that I want to have in my life that align with those values? Or what's the organization I want to work in that aligns with those values? Or something that's deeply meaningful to you in terms of your experience, or something that you want to continue to do in terms of fulfilling your purpose, like being in tune with what those things are, so that in your leadership, you are embodying those, you are making those happen on a day-to-day, week-to-week, year-to-year basis. Does that make sense? That one's a little bit more conceptual. Any questions there?
Yeah, it does. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, Tara.
Great. Okay, so then we're just going to do, I'm actually going to flip back here to the acronym. And now that we've gone through each of those components, knowing that we're all at different places, and also that there's no way that any one of us would be doing all of these things simultaneously necessarily and at the same level. Just like you to sit and reflect for a minute based on what we just talked about. Which one of these do you feel really good about at the moment? Like, I really think I do that well. Could be like, I really think energy and enthusiasm I've got locked down. Like I don't, it's not something that I need to be thinking about it anymore. And then which one of them is, I'm curious about that. Or when we're talking about it, I recognize like, oh, I could be spending more time there. I could be examining that a little bit more. So pick, two ends of the spectrum. Doing it really well, feel like it's a strength at the moment, and then curious about it, think I might need to explore it more on the other end. And then I'll just ask for a few people to share. So just take a couple minutes to do that. And writing things down really helps. That's optional, of course, but might be helpful to you. All right, I'm just going to stop sharing just so that we can see everybody's faces towards the end. And just ask for anyone who'd like to share to share it. And just so you know, you do get a boost from articulating your strengths and your areas for development in a group. Like you'll actually get a further or an acceleration of your development by verbalizing it out loud. Not that I'm putting pressure on you, but I'm just saying, if you decide you want to do that in a group, you're going to be like, oh, I just said that out loud. Like this is my strength and this is the thing I'm going to work on. And it's an accountability that comes differently from verbalizing things in a group. So share if you'd like.
I'd be happy to share first.
Great, Marshall.
Not just because I'm bold. I need to run a few minutes early for 4 o'clock. So I'll start by saying thank you. I will leave energized. This has been terrific. So I think I do this well. I don't know that it's the thing I do the best, but the second E, emotional intelligence, is the piece I'm most excited about. I'm also most concerned about. It's interesting that we don't start learning about this earlier, or that the systems aren't set up to sort of validate the EQ. You talked a lot about IQ, and there's so many things in our life where it's, recognized and validated, and it just seems like it's gaining some momentum. But there may be an opportunity to help educate people earlier, children, and other capacities.
For sure.
Right, it translates long before they're in, let's say, the business setting. So I love that one. I think it's super important. The one I need to work on the most is the long-term orientation. I sort of had that pow moment, like when you said, and I wrote it down, for the impact you'll have for generations to come. Like, right, I'm thinking like next quarter, next year, and wow, that's what it's all about. So that was my big takeaway, and something I'm excited to work on. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. That's great. Okay. Oh, that's okay. Oh, go ahead, Sean. Definitely share. You want to share in this chat, or you want to just come on? We don't mind the noisiness if you don't mind it. Yes, go for it. write it in the chat. And if anyone wants to share in the meantime, then we can go back to you. Looks like you got Sandra and Armando. You guys duke it out, whichever one you want to do.
Sandra, please first.
All right, thank you. Mine is actually very similar to Marshall's. And the one that struck me was, and Armando, I'm going to be totally honest, I'm glad you asked the question that you did about the clock maker versus timekeeper. I thought I had understood what Tara was explaining until you asked the question, and then I realized actually I could use some help there too. And that's where Marshall's point came up of, we do spend a lot of time talking about leadership and being self-aware, and I feel good about that. But that when that concept of, and what about the impact that you could potentially have after you're no longer there, was very impactful, not just in a professional setting, but a personal setting as well. Whether it's after you leave a meeting or after you in that generational concept as well. So I think that's the one that I have the most opportunity. The one that I think I feel better about, but I wanted to add on to it, not that I'm saying that that conscious capitalism needs to be better worded by any stretch, but the energy and enthusiasm one, I feel like I do have a lot of, but I had heard somebody once explain, energy, enthusiasm, somebody can be a ball of energy, but not be on message. And so it's when you've got your message and your passion together that you actually become charismatic. And so that's
Nice.
where I think that's where I wanted to add that layer in there. I do have a question, and I don't mean to dominate the time, but the one that I think I have the most question about, if I were wanting to share this internally with our own leadership team or with my colleagues, the one I question about selling is, because of the use of the title, is spiritual intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, and you don't have to answer now, but if there's any thought around how can I describe that in a way that doesn't, that gives, brings it more to how you would describe it, because it doesn't scream spiritual intelligence to me in the way the definition is written. So I'd love some tips or guidance there.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I'll answer that briefly, but
Yeah.
it's such a good question. And it is one that many struggle with, in terms of it feels so foreign in a business context to be talking about that. And I think it comes down to getting people to think about their compass, like knowing your own internal compass, and like getting down to maybe providing examples of when you've known that something was off or on, when it was aligned for you and when it wasn't. And people who have strong spiritual intelligence have that intelligence to know what's aligned for them and not, because they have the practices. So where I usually start with, Sandra, is because most people don't have any kind of practices, and you can call them spiritual practices or not. It might be like, do you get some exercise every day? Do you get regular rest? Do you think about your nutrition? Like all the things that we know we should be doing to take care of ourselves. It usually starts there. Because if you're not taking care of yourself in the basics, then the spiritual piece feels really far away. So that's usually how you can access it.
That's great. Yep,
yeah.
that's great.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Good.
Perfect.
Okay, so I just want to go. So I think it's Sean, shared in the chat, strength is systems intelligence. Wow, that's awesome, because not many people would say that. So that's really cool. And needing to work on energy and enthusiasm as it relates to knowing my purpose. Wow, that's awesome. So it sounds like for Sean, and Sean, weigh in the chat if you'd like, knowing your purpose feels like what you're saying is that might be a prerequisite for having more energy and enthusiasm, based on what Sandra was talking about, being on point on the passion around your purpose. So yes, great. Very good. And Armando, what would you like to share?
I think it happened something funny with me, because the ones that I think I have down, that I'm good at, I sometimes go overboard, and that how can I explain it? That makes me need to work on other letters, because I overdo some of them. I'm
Oh,
gonna say
yeah.
it. I
No,
think
no, every strength can turn into a weakness when it's overused.
yeah.
Really
For
important
example,
point. Yeah.
I think the ones that I do have strength, love and care, emotional intelligence. But for example, sometimes that part of me, I work in talent management area. So that part of love and care is part of my job, but also my personality. But sometimes I go so overboard with that the systems intelligence fails me because I maybe sometimes don't have this long-term vision because I want to fix things now. You know what I mean? There's this
Yes.
whole concept about growing pains. So sometimes stuff needs to happen. People will not be happy for the moment when you're making changes, but I want everyone to be happy. I want to be in a good place. So I sometimes lack this long term because I want to fix things like now.
Oh, yeah.
Am I
Been
making
there.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Such a good acknowledgement.
And the
Yep.
flexibility as well. Sometimes I feel I have to work on my flexibility because I need things to happen fast. I need people to be happy. I need to solve the problems like yesterday. So that kind of, you know what I mean? The
Oh,
good
yeah.
things I have it in spades, but then it makes me lack this too, like a lot.
Yeah, it's like you have really strong muscles in some areas, and sometimes that prevents building muscles up in other areas. And you're
Yeah.
describing, that systems piece and the long-term orientation. Sometimes if you're sweating too much of the small stuff along the way of like only thinking of like the day to day or the week to week and not putting into the bigger perspective, been there, that's why I can say this. Then it doesn't allow you to know how, like the forest for the trees and what you should be focused on in the trees. So to speak. So such an important recognition. And I'm so glad you brought up the piece around for all of us, if something comes naturally as a strength, that we do rely on it and overuse it because it's easy for us to do. And that can block development in other areas that we need to work on as well. So really important to be cognizant of that. We're right at time. We've covered pretty much the basics, although I think we could talk for hours, it feels like. And so I really want to thank everybody for coming. I hope that you got what you expected from the session. Hopefully at least feel like you have a good understanding of how we define conscious leadership in Conscious Capitalism. Definitely join us for future sessions. If you're not on our mailing list, you can go to the website and get on the mailing list, and you'll get information about all of our future events. And really thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Terry. It was a wonderful talk. Nice to meet everyone. Good afternoon.
Thank you for coming, everybody. Bye.
Bye.